see if we can get this in a little tighter so we can all be on screen.
Yeah.
That'll work. That'll work. We're still socially distanced enough, but we're trying to find a way to make this work. Welcome to another edition of Faith Matters, where we talk about faith because, indeed, faith matters. It's like we rehearsed it or something.
Oops.
You know, the funny thing is when we started doing this virtually, it was very odd. We all felt very self-conscious, very uncomfortable. And now I think I speak for everybody when I say, well, we just have acquired a bit of a level of comfort with it. And that's a good thing. But what really makes Faith Matters an enjoyable and educational experience is not us, but you. Because it's your commentary. This is your time to weigh in on the gospel passage. As I'm fond of saying, the sermon is a monologue. One of us talks and you listen. The Faith Matters is intended to be a dialogue where we explore the gospel passage together, and our commentary and our conversation is informed by your thoughts and your concepts. So without any further ado, let's press on into Matthew's gospel. I'm really interested to see what you all have to say about this today, biblical scholars. In Matthew's gospel, we hear, once more Jesus spoke to the people in parables, saying, "The kingdom of heaven may be compared to a king who gave a wedding banquet for his son. He sent his slaves to call those who had been invited to the wedding banquet, but they would not come. Again, he sent other slaves, saying, 'Tell those who have been invited, look, I've prepared my dinner. My oxen and my fat calves have been slaughtered, and everything is ready. Come to the wedding banquet.' But they made light of it and went away, one to his farm, another to his business, while the rest seized his slaves, mistreated them, and killed them. The king was enraged. He sent his troops, destroyed those murderers, and burned their city. Then he said to his slaves, 'The wedding is ready, but those invited were not worthy. Go therefore into the main streets and invite everyone you find to the wedding banquet.' Those slaves went out into the streets and gathered all whom they found, both good and bad. So the wedding hall was filled with guests. But when the king came in to see the guests, he noticed a man there who was not wearing a wedding robe. And he said to him, 'Friend, how did you get in here without a wedding robe?' And he was speechless. Then the king said to the attendants, 'Bind him hand and foot and throw him into the outer darkness, where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. For many are called, but few are chosen.'" Well, very clear, very straightforward. There's really nothing to talk about with that, is there? Or perhaps there is. What did you hear? What did you hear new? What did you hear for the first time that you might not have heard?
I have a question for our theologians, Rick.
Okay.
And it is this. Because in parables, usually when there's a king, then when we're talking about it later, the king or the vineyard owner is always God. And so we are very hesitant to ascribe any characteristics or qualities to the head of these parables that's critical. But am I the only one, when one hears this parable from Matthew, I think, that's not a very good king.
Yeah.
He invites his closest friends to come to a wedding feast. Not only do they not come, anything is more interesting than that.
Right.
Their businesses, whatever else. But then they even kill his slaves. this is not a very respected king. But that we can't share that because it sounds like criticism of God.
Right, yeah. No, I saw that too, but my thing was, when would you not want to go to a banquet that a king puts on?
Right?
You know? Like, dang, that would be the sought-after ticket.
Wait, Jennifer, I've got an answer. The kind of king who, when he puts on a wedding, if you show up and you're not dressed well enough,
Ooh.
he actually ties you up and has his servants throw you out on his head and curses you.
Right.
Maybe that's the kind of king you don't want to go to.
And that's the other thing. He had to go in the streets and invite all these people. How many homeless people on the street do you know that are dressed up?
Right.
You know, like you're bringing in all these people on the street and they're going to be dressed for the occasion? I don't think so. So yeah, that's...
And way more people in first century Palestine only own one outfit than here the poorest people. You know, we can go down to the thrift mart, and if you just sort of say, I don't have any money, they'll still hand you 3 outfits. But
so yeah,
that was not how it was in the first, you know, we had to hand make clothes.
Right, all right, still, yeah, another reason.
Wow, okay.
Sorry, yeah, we're probably going off on it too.
So the first comment's going to be, Jennifer and Chris are heretics.
Well, Kelly tells us this one gets incredibly misused by the fire and brimstone crowd.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
Amen to that.
Yeah, that's
I can
true.
see that.
And we've actually seen a couple of those in the last couple of months. The ones that could be very heavy-handed and used as a stick to beat people with. But is that really what is going on here? Or is there another interpretation? Well, first of all, let me ask you two, because you're seeing a lot of the problems with this gospel passage. Is there anything for us to learn from this gospel? Why did Matthew include this particular parable in his gospel?
Well, just in case not everybody knows this, and I'm sure somebody out there will be hearing this for the first time, or I'm reminding them, this parable of the king having a feast and then the people don't come and he invites people from the highways and byways instead happens in Matthew, in Luke, and in the Gospel of Thomas, which of course is not in the Bible, but it's a very respected text because it's absolutely agreed to be one of the first, earlier than the 4 we've got. And it's always it's the most minimal. But even in the Gospel of Thomas, there's a brief version of this story. Only in Matthew is there the end where the poorly dressed guest gets thrown out. And also just a reminder, or for some hearing it for the first time maybe, Matthew was appealing as a gospel writer more to Jewish people, trying to convince them that true Judaism was to follow Jesus. That he was the Messiah that the prophets had spoken of. So sometimes Matthew as an author got very forceful. And the end of this, there are some who would claim this might be Matthew's creation more than what came out of Jesus' mouth.
So that actually brings up a good point for us. What if we look at this parable just at the first part? What if we go through the whole idea of the king throws the banquet, the people refuse to come because they'd rather go to work, they'd rather go to their business, they'd rather go to their farm, and then they mistreat the king's slaves, and then the king sends his slaves out to invite other people. Just bring in anybody from the street because that's how I'm going to fill up the wedding feast, and stop there. We won't stop permanently, but let's just look at that beginning part. Is there a message of any value in there? What do you think?
I think he's talking about what's already been happening in Jewish history. Because to me, the slaves are the prophets, and the people have already, not listened to them, scorned them, killed them, whatever, right? Trying to get the people to come back to God. So that's what I see as the slaves there. Because the people want to do their own thing.
So the king has created this wonderful banquet and invited them to it, but they don't want to answer that invitation. They don't want to come to this grand and glorious feast. And right in here it says, my oxen and my fat calves have been slaughtered. In first century Palestine, that means this is going to be a feast. Now, by the way, just so you will have some background, a wedding feast was not like we have today, where the reception lasts, maybe 3 hours. A wedding banquet was a 7-day affair. Yeah, you heard me, 7 days. This was a big, 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 big deal. And to not go to a wedding feast, well, that just wasn't done. And yet, these guests would rather go to their farms and their businesses, and they even go to the lengths of killing the slaves. As Jed says, that could be the prophets. And then we have the king saying, well, forget of those people then. I will invite other people, anybody who happens to walk by. And as Chris says, Matthew is written to the Jewish audience. You could make a good case that he's now talking about the Gentiles. And if you wonder who the Gentiles are, folks, that would be us. Anybody who's not a Jew is a Gentile. So this was quite startling for the Jews of the time. All right, enough of my talking. Let's see what you guys have to say. Brian says his interpretation is that God's forgiven our sins through grace and invited us to his house, but we still have to play by the rules. Well, that'll be the second part of it. Yeah. We will get to that.
I'd have to say that's a darn good summary, Brian.
That is a pretty good summary. You must be attending Faith Matters a lot, Brian.
Or did you come to the 8 a.m. service?
Yes, in fact, he did.
I know he did.
Schuller says, I say those guys weren't the king's real friends and used him, and the people didn't care about the wedding or didn't listen carefully to what the king says. I say listen and care about the things that are important.
Preach.
Yes, yes, sister. The Jews had made up their own rules and made their rules more important than God. Ooh, great insights. Great insights. And so I think we're all kind of getting this, right? God says, you know what? You're my chosen ones. You're the ones I invited, but you've rejected my invitation. And so therefore, I'm going to extend this invitation to everybody. You can just go on your merry way and do what you want to do, but I'm going to open up this invitation to everybody, and everybody is welcome at this feast that I've prepared. Because, a party, the more the merrier. And then we come to the second part of it, which does get more problematic, doesn't it? I guess I will ask you, is there anything that first of all, we're somewhat repelled by the second part of this, right? Because we're identifying with this poor guy who was just minding his own business, walking down the street. The slave taps him on the shoulder and says, hey, buddy, you want to go to a great party? My king is throwing a wedding feast and you're invited. And the guy says, sure, let's go. And in he goes. He's got a glass of champagne in one hand and a little plate of hors d'oeuvres in the other. And then he feels another tap on the shoulder, and it's the king saying, hey, friend, how did you get in here looking like you do? And then it goes south real quick, doesn't it? Is there something that we can learn from this?
I think it's important. This is a micro detail, not macro, but it is important that Jesus in this story says that the poorly dressed man or underdressed guy was speechless. If indeed this were a good king, and the jury's still out on that, but let's pretend he is a good king and a fair king. He does say, friend, how'd you get in here?
Right.
The other guy could have said, your slave invited me, and I'm really happy to be here. And I'm really sorry, it's the only outfit I own. And the king might have said, oh, well, in that event, go get in the closet and get yourself a little something better.
Wouldn't that have been a nicer ending?
Right.
But the fact that he was speechless and just sort of unable to explain his own reality was not was not to his benefit.
It certainly didn't work out well for him, did it? He didn't throw himself on the king's mercy. Again, let's just take some history here and just pause for a second. When you were invited to a wedding feast, just like when you're invited to a wedding today, you show up in your best. You really want to show your best side, so you're clean. If you are a Jew, you've gone through the ritual of purification. You smell good, because let's face it, in first century Palestine, they didn't have a lot of deodorant. You've cleaned yourself up. You've put on your best clean outfit, and you are pressed and dressed, as they say, in your Sunday best. And yet, we have a situation where none of these folks knew that they were going to be invited to this wedding. They didn't get an invitation in advance. They didn't know that the favor of your presence is requested at the wedding of blah, 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 and blah, blah, blah on June the 14th. They didn't get any of that. They just got that tap on the shoulder. And they came as they were.
Yeah. I don't know. Something's bothering me about the wedding robe thing. I wonder if he provided wedding robes.
Well, I don't think he provided wedding robes because...
Did.
Well, there is a different story
Yeah.
along that line.
Because did everybody own one?
Laura says she thinks the guest represents somebody who's not committed to God, kind of like a freeloader.
Right. Not a real friend, yeah.
Rosalie says, of course he was speechless. Poor people have little egos, so of course he was speechless in the presence of a king. I get that.
Yeah.
Something about the wedding robe thing.
Brian says his silence tells you that he knew what was expected, but failed to comply and now has no explanation for his behavior. Oh, and Beth, you're getting to it, at least from my perspective. Beth reminds us to always be ready because you never know when you're going to get a tap on the shoulder.
Right.
As my Jewish friends would say, aha! Now we're getting somewhere.
Like the lambs.
Many are chosen, but many are called, but not all are chosen. These folks were called, but they weren't ready. We need to always be ready because we don't know. We never know what's going to happen. I will share a very quick story. So doing what we do for a living, we're on call 24/7. Well, I was relatively newly ordained, and we were out to a play, and I got a text about 9:30 at night saying, hey, can you get to the hospital and administer last rites to someone? They weren't part of the parish, they were out of town, but still, I needed to go and function as a priest like that. Well, I was dressed in jeans and a sweater and didn't really have anything with me. And so I found myself in the lobby of the hospital, not dressed appropriately, without my prayer book, and I had to go in and provide comfort to this family in their time of grief and recite the prayers from my iPhone. Since then, I have gotten a little bit wiser. I have a spare clerical collar and prayer book in my car for just that eventuality, because once you get caught out once, you hopefully learn from that experience and you're prepared the next time.
Yeah, you don't think the collar matters until you see how much it matters.
Oh my goodness. This is like
Especially if
a
you don't know
get
these
through
people.
any door in a hospital outfit. But without this, at 10 o'clock on a Friday night, you're not getting in anywhere. So I don't know, I see that in here. This guy was invited. He didn't expect to be invited, but he wasn't ready to be invited. And there's a problem with that.
So everyone should always have a wedding robe hanging in their closet.
Keep your wedding robe on standby, right?
Yeah. You never know when you're going to get invited, huh? Wow.
And if we want to make more problems with this, we can also cross-reference the fact that when Jesus sends out the 70, he says, don't even take an extra outfit.
Right.
And it seems to be, it would be a reasonable assumption when you see how itinerant Jesus is, and to think that he might himself only own one outfit.
Right.
Now, he has the advantage that he can go up to a mountaintop and becomes blazingly clean and white and talk to Moses, but it's still only one outfit.
Yeah.
But Jesus had a great dry cleaner, apparently.
That's right. He did. No. But I'm thinking this is more like the story of the bridesmaids didn't have their lamps ready.
Yes.
So he's doing...
Speak loudly.
Thought I was. Sorry. More like
They can't hear you if you don't speak louder.
More like the bridesmaids that didn't have the oil in their lamps when the time came.
That's right.
Those kind of stories, I guess, is more like what we're
Those
talking
be
about.
ready stories,
Yeah.
and there are lots of them.
Yeah.
'Cause
Yeah.
if you knew when the thief were coming, but you
Right.
don't, so always have the watchman.
Right. Don't judge a book by its cover. Always be ready and always be respectful. Well said, Schuller. Would God really turn us out because we're not dressed right? Well, I think we shouldn't look at it as literally as that, Rosalie. Jesus was very provocative when he told his parable stories, because he really wanted people to think about them. And if they were just sort of kind and milquetoast and, spiritual pablum, they wouldn't have been as memorable and they wouldn't have made their point. So I don't think what Jesus is saying is, if we don't show up with the right clothing on, God's going to throw us out and we're going to hell. But I think what Jesus was saying is, be ready, because you never know. How many of us know the precise moment that we are going to die? We're all going to die, brothers and sisters. I hate to be the one to break this to you. Humanity has a 100% mortality rate. Even Lazarus died a second time and was not resurrected in this world. We are all going to die, but none of us know when that's going to happen. And so there is a way to read this parable that says, always be ready to stand before God, because you don't know if that might be today, next week, next month, next year, or right now. Okay, it wasn't right now, but you get my point, right?
It was for somebody.
Yeah, right. You never know.
Yeah, Bob Clement says he's read that the king would have provided wedding clothes. There is that possibility, and there is that in one of the other parable stories. Again, Matthew is the only one who has this sort of addition to it. Beth agrees with Jen. Beth, I've made that my stated policy in life.
No, he hasn't.
It works much better for me. Yeah, they wouldn't be as thought-provoking. Matthew definitely is thought-provoking. All right, Carol raises a good question. She says, I don't understand that last sentence. For many are called, but few are chosen.
Neither. But I think that's where we run into trouble with the chosen people of God and the elect and all that. I could see where they would pull that right out of there. Like, we're the elect because we're the chosen ones, and you're not, right? But then I guess the Jews thought they were the chosen ones, right?
Well, and that's the whole point. I mean, what I think what you have is Jesus is kind of putting a pin in the balloon of the Jews with their concept that because we are daughters and sons of Abraham, we are therefore God's chosen people, because that's what it says in our scripture. And so what we do doesn't matter because God likes us best. And the reality, Jesus is saying, because if you don't pay attention to what God's calling you to do, you forfeit your chosenness. And I will go out and I will choose other people.
And even among them, not everybody will say yes to my kind invitation.
Right.
Or then live into it appropriately.
Yeah.
Right. Think of the parable of the seed, right? The sower goes out to sow some seed, and some falls on the path and is trampled and doesn't sprout. Some falls in rocky soil and starts but withers. Some grows up, but the weeds come in and choke it. and other seed falls on good soil, and it grows into an abundant harvest. That parable is not very different from this parable if you think about it. It's just a question of which way are you looking at it? Are you the seed or are you the ground? You're getting a lot of agreement. You're doing great today.
Oh, do you know, I forgot to mention this when we were on the first paragraph, but again, back specific to Matthew and the Jewish audience.
Yep.
Positively, it's not in the Gospel of Thomas. I don't think it's in Luke. That one sentence of destroy those murderers and burned their city, the sending troops, shows that this was written after AD 69, when Jerusalem actually had its temple destroyed and the entire city burned. And Matthew's taking a little swipe at them, saying, talk about getting their attention.
Right.
But that reference is absolutely a historical mention that's, what they say in screenwriting, it's a little too on the nose.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's actually a really good thing to remember, folks. None of these Gospels were written contemporaneously, meaning there wasn't a scribe who followed them around and took notes. These are written from recollections, and in many cases they're written at least 50, 60, 70 years after the events took place. The stories were oral stories, and they were talked about all the time, but they weren't codified into writing until then.
And they were written with a macro agenda.
Yeah. And each gospel, that's why one of the reasons we have 4 gospels, at least the 4 that are church canon, meaning they've been codified into the Bible. As Father Chris points out, there are a number of others that are called apocryphal, which is just a fancy word for saying not part of the biblical canon, but there is still something to be gleaned from them as well. Brian asks, well, since all of us fall short, just like the guy without the wedding clothes, how do we keep from getting thrown out?
Yeah.
Well, it reminds me of my time as a Boy Scout a million years ago. Their motto is, be prepared, right? So just like I keep a spare collar and prayer book in my car, we should make ourselves aware that we don't know when the day and the hour is coming, so we should be ready. Don't put off making peace with someone that you have problems with because you may never get that chance. Don't postpone joy. Don't get so caught up in your farm or your business that you fail to see the invitation the King is making to you.
Yeah, I keep coming back to the robe because I keep coming back to that phrase, clothed in righteousness. So Jesus provides that robe. And if we're willing to take that robe, then we're going to be ready. You know what I mean?
Did y'all hear that?
Someone else already said something about they provided the robes.
Yeah.
That just...
When Jesus says, I am the way and the truth and the life, Jesus is really saying, I'm also your wedding robe.
I'm your robe. Yeah, you got to throw them on. Or you got to be able to take the robe on.
We have to take on that robe. We have to accept our faith. And then we have to practice it and live it.
Yeah.
That's the hard part. Showing up and getting baptized is, let's be honest, it's really not all that hard. But living into that baptismal promise day in and day out for our entire lives, that's the hard part, folks. We're called to love God and love one another as much as God loves us. That's tough stuff. Because some days we don't always want to love everybody, do we? That guy that cut me off trying to make a left-hand turn today, boy, it was hard to love him. I wanted to blare my horn and yell something at him, but I decided not, partly because of the way I'm dressed today, I decided not to do that. Jen needs to be mic'd. She gets it. Well, none of us are mic'd. Jen just is not speaking up loudly.
Sorry.
But yes, she is definitely getting it. The big E word. Yeah, it is evangelism. And really, what I talked about in the sermon last week, evangelism is nothing more than the telling of stories. What is Jesus doing with this parable, indeed all the parables, but telling stories? Jesus' parables are stories, and they're stories that give us a way of approaching and understanding the story, the great story of God.
Yeah.
And so our evangelism is just a way of sharing our own stories. My story of not having a collar and a prayer book that day, that's my story. Every single one of you has got your story too that you can use to illustrate this point. And that's how this works. And we have come to the end of our journey this morning. Thank you for being with us. Thank you for your erudition and your biblical scholarship. This is my favorite half hour of the week. God bless you and keep you. We'll see you in half an hour for our worship service.
Bye, everyone.
And a different sermon than 8 a.m.
A different sermon than 8.